And we are live. Good morning for those of you on the West Coast in the States, and good evening to those of you in the European area. Welcome to Branch of Laurels. I am a Shaxi. I'm a member of the Order of the Laurel from Ontier. And my guest tonight is Dame Lyonet de Covenham, and she is a Laurel from Drachenwald. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be talking to you.
And you. I'm super excited to talk to someone from your area. Where, mundanely, where are you from?
Well, I live in the south of England. So I live in a tiny village just outside of Guildford, which is about 30 miles from the center of London.
I did a summer exchange program in Guildford. So
wonderful. In fact, we made
Guildford. That's awesome.
So I'm in Sheer, so the pretty little village not far from Guildford.
Oh, wonderful. How did you find the SCA and what brought you into it? What is your SCA origin story?
Well, it all started in 1980, so just about 40 years ago. And I'd seen the SCA on television a bit, local television, but also I saw a bit on NBC in the US about Penzic War. And I saw the site of the field battle in I guess it was Penzic 10. And I saw that and I said, oh my God, that is what I want to do. And of course, certainly then there was no internet, so you couldn't Google the SCA. And I tried looking in the local telephone directory, and there was no sign of the SCA in the local telephone directory. So I was perhaps giving up hope of discovering this wonderful group of people. And then I was in the synagogue one day for Yom Kippur, so a very solemn festival, and exactly the sort of solemn festival where it gets really, really boring if you don't occasionally sneak out for a chat with people in the lobby. And I snuck out for a chat in the lobby. And I was chatting with a lovely lady who said that she had just been camping in Pennsylvania with her medieval club. And I said, are you in the Society for Creative Anachronism? And she said, yes, I am. And so I was just in love with the society right away. And the poor woman had to put up with teenage kid phoning her up every night to find out everything there was to know about everything in the society. And there are people still in the SCA who were mythical figures to me when I was 14. And because I came from a very religious family, and I was certainly not permitted to do any Sabbath breaking by going out on a Saturday to go to an event. So in the winter, after nightfall on a Saturday, my parents would let me go to SCA events. So I could go to them just a little bit. So from that 14-year-old beginning came rather a long career of participation in the society.
That 1980 that's really long.
It is. I took time off. I spent about 15 years doing postgraduate study and having children and things like that.
Awesome. And do your kids play in the SCA, or was that completely, did you keep those two things separate?
My older girl, Lady Angelica, is a very keen participant. She's an excellent fencer, fences better than I do. She is an armored fighter as well, and she has fought in Coronet and Crown Tournament. And she is very committed. She is my deputy seneschal of the Principality. She is preceptor of the Drachenwald Academy of Defense. And you can see me puffing up with pride as I discuss all of that.
I can.
And my younger girl, Mathilde, has become much too cool for the SCA. So she grew up in the SCA, but now it's just not cool enough for her. So she has chosen to direct her attentions elsewhere. But as Lady Ursula, she certainly has her word of arms and has certainly done service to her kingdom as well.
That's wonderful. Wow. So this woman that you annoyed with your phone calls as a teenager, do you still know her? Is she still active?
Absolutely. This was back in the East Kingdom, in a part of the East Kingdom which is now Avelmark, in the barony of Thescor. But she lives in the East Kingdom, and she's still active. And her name is Lady Sindara, and she's active in the East Kingdom in beadwork, and she of course has her own family and children as well.
Wow.
And I'm very pleased that there's a bit of lineage there, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah. And were there other people that were early mentors for you as you came into the society?
When I started at university, I briskly became squire to Duke Finvar de Ta. And Duke Finvar is a great figure of the early years of the society, especially in the early years of Eldermere. And when he became my knight, he was just also becoming chairman of the SCA board of directors. And when I took a belt from him, one of the things that he made clear was that he wasn't going to have a lot of time and energy for teaching me fighting, and that would have to come from the Canton Marshal. But he would teach me a lot about the society. And oh my goodness, did I learn a lot about the society, both from Duke Finvar, but also because I started in the SCA with a view that the SCA had infinite possibilities. I was young, arguably I was young and stupid, but I was young and passionate. And so I pushed against some boundaries, and I had some pretty stiff pushback sometimes. But Duke Finvar was very important to my understanding of what the society is all about. And to this day, sometimes people will say, oh, that fellow over there, I don't think he's playing the same game that we're playing. And I think to myself, oh, you think that, do you? You think that, do you? Because there are whole possibilities and worlds of possibilities in the society.
There are, and I think that the inclusivity that we have in the society is pretty remarkable. I do actually prehistoric stuff. I don't do medieval stuff really at all. And I've been accepted for that, and that's wonderful. I still have the same passion for studying history and the archaeological record. So yeah, I think that's really cool. That's quite a introduction to be connected to somebody that's active in the bod on the bod level. It's kind of like a view behind the curtain of the dream.
Very much so. And in fact, you say the curtain of the dream. This was, I became a squire in November of '84. And that was just before the term, the dream, started to become current.
Oh, wow.
And because it was all around the 20-year celebration in Texas in 1985. That, 86 it must have been, when people started to talk about that sort of thing. And I've always had a very skeptical view of the dream, because of course there is much talk about it, but no two people will ever describe it the same way. So the dream is something that I always cock a skeptical eyebrow at.
I think that's funny. Well, I was going to ask you what the dream is to you. If you could make it all your dream, but if you're skeptical about it, maybe not.
I won't be prescriptive about it.
Okay.
I'll give you an altered answer. And this is especially sharpened by the plague just now. What I value most about the society, and what I'm not getting a lot of, as we're all being very careful not to catch our death, is immersive experience. And when I first went to Pennsic War, Pennsic 13, when I first started to experience really well done immersive events, when I started to do a bit of persona play, because of course coming from an Eastern Rite kingdom. Some persona play was there, and I used to spend time at Duke Caraidoc's camp at Penzic and immerse myself. Immersive moments are one of the things that really mark the society for me. And I've done reenactment. I started a reenactment group with some friends at one point, and I did English Civil War reenactment both in America and here in England. And one of the things that helped me come back to the society was the immersive experience, and a consistent immersive experience where we continue to immerse ourselves, even when we're not at events. We immerse ourselves in some of the connective tissue that connects one event to the next. So that's I guess what I think of when people talk about the dream.
It's that immersive experience.
Hmm.
And how do you do that at home? Do you sink into research books, or?
I don't. For me, the plague has been a desert from an immersive experience point of view. My work table here has not seen my quills writing since in-person events stopped this time last year. My last event was in Meadowmarsh in Germany in March of last year, and I've been doing simple work since then. And I've been doing mostly sewing from an SCA point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because for me, the electricity, the interaction has disappeared briefly. And it's one of the reasons that for me, I'm Seneschal of a principality, and one of the things that I'm very keen that we do here in the principality is get our post-plague heads on now. Start thinking about how we're going to come back, what we're going to do that will rebuild what we've had to put away for a year or two by the time we're back.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be 2 years as well. Do you envision having to play in masks for a while?
I have a really nice heraldic mask. Here are my arms, and a lovely lady who made my gown has also made me a heraldic mask for 14th century, and I've got a black work mask for doing 16th century. Do I know? I don't think so. I think there's an extent to which we will feel filthy walking about without masks on. Here in England, we're not wearing masks out of doors, but we are indoors, and I think that the feeling that it's a bit insanitary to be breathing the same air as other people, that's going to persist for a while. So we might find ourselves with that sort of rule.
Right.
And we might find ourselves, in order not to go about with masks on, I think that there are parts of the society, I've played in the West Kingdom, where everything is out of doors for much of the year. Well, I promise you in England, we go indoors for the cold and rainy parts of the year, which of course is 12 months. And I think we're going to be a bit more outdoorsy in the way we play going forward.
Which is fun. We get a lot of rain too. I'm in Washington State, and the climates are pretty similar. So we've gotten used to playing in the rain.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So I'm really jumping around a lot this morning. I apologize. I'm going to kind of take us back around. So you got into fighting right away. And were you a heavy fighter?
I fought armored very early on. So I joined when I was 14. I authorized shortly after my 17th birthday. And I fought armored for about a decade, for 10 years.
And then at that point you switched to, I think the terms, I'm not familiar with the exact terms you use, so I don't want to misstate it. But after 10 years, you switched to a different kind of fighting?
Well, there was a time when the SCA as a whole was not entirely welcoming to fencing. And that time went from about the year one of the society till about 2015 in some places, and indeed until 2017 or 18 in some places. And I did not like the kind of SCA fencing that existed where I was. So I and some of my friends started to do historical fencing, but with different equipment. And of course, what we started is now known as historical European martial arts, and it continues to exist elsewhere. And it took me a while before I felt like fencing in the society. So no, I didn't switch off the armored combat and switch on the fencing. Really, what I found was that armored combat had soured for me, and I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy with the SCA really at the time, and the armored combat really wasn't doing it for me. I really wanted to be a knight, and it became clear to me at about that time, about 1994, that I wasn't ever going to be a knight. And so I put it down and stepped away. But after I started playing again, I really did enjoy seeing the fencers fencing. And around then, cut and thrust started to be legal. So I started doing SCA steel fighting, and I started doing it with an eye to being a deadly killer longsword fencer in the SCA, and fighting cut and thrust. And so I picked up a longsword, and I made myself a nice 14th century fighting kit with blackened spurs and a clap vizier bassinet, and I went out there to do all of that, and I discovered that the other thing that everyone who fights steel was doing was fighting rapier. And I said, rapier? Well, I could fight rapier as well. So for the last almost 6 years now, I've been fighting steel in the SCA, both cut and thrust, heavy blade, and there are newfangled things that come in like fencing spears and all that. I'm a little bit ambivalent about those, but I'm very keen on fencing.
That's so exciting. It's so great to find new things to fall in love with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in that interim, you started doing more art things. So let's kind of turn and talk about your arts.
When I first joined the society, one of the things I saw on the wall at my first event in December of 1980, two things I saw. One thing I saw was an award scroll, and the other thing I saw was a map of the known world. The old Berkeley at the top of the map that we used to say. And I quite like calligraphy, and so I started doing calligraphy. Well, certainly before I was fighting, but I didn't do SCA calligraphy as such. I taught myself to do medieval English hands, Latin hands, and I taught myself to do Hebrew calligraphy. And I did both of those a lot as a kid. And then I started to do SCA scrolls, especially the first summer I was in university. I was staying with my grandmother in New York City, right in the center of the East Kingdom. And I called up the East Kingdom Signet and I said, give me scroll assignments, and I'll make you scrolls. And I spent a lot of that summer sitting at my grandmother's dining room table doing SCA scrolls, which my grandmother thought was barking mad. So I started with that. And of course, I started making my own clothes. Our baronial newsletter reprinted an article from Tournaments Illuminated by Louise of Woodsholm, who at the time was the society arts officer. And it was all about not making cheesy clothes, not making stuff that looked like it came out of an early B movie, I think she said. And I was really inspired by that. And I wrote her a letter, and she wrote me a letter back, and it was so exciting. The mistress of the Laurels from the West Kingdom or Caid or wherever it was had written me back, and she wrote me all about how hand sewing, because I had no sewing machine, hand sewing was a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and you could make glorious clothes hand sewing. And I am so glad that no photographs survive of my first kit. I must have looked like I was wearing a pool table It was like green baize, like a pool table, but it was made out of this fabric with a slimy polyester double knit backing, and I didn't understand things like seam allowance, and um, it was absolutely repulsive, and it laced up the front. But because I didn't understand seam allowance, it was very gappy in the front. And anyway, it was absolutely dreadful. No photographs survive, but I've been making clothes since then as well. And when I lived in Septentria, the barony of Septentria in what is now Eldermere, then the Middle Kingdom, we had a really strong culture of everybody does arts. And it was a bit like everybody does archery at Penzig. You are expected to go and shoot your arrows, and you may not know how to hit a target, but it doesn't matter. Everybody does it. Well, it was like that with arts as well. And we were expected to enter arts and science pentathlon. That was just what one did. And one was expected to, therefore, enter 5 bits of documentable art or craft work. And that meant that there was no notion that I'm a fighter, I don't do arts. Absolutely not. My knight, Duke Finvar, at the time was a knight and a pelican, and has since become a laurel. And people like that were the people we sought to imitate. And so I've been doing arts in the society, barring some time off, for 40 years. Calligraphy, clothing. I entered a research paper once on 16th century gardening. Not because I knew anything about it, but because my undergraduate 16th century social history professor had mentioned something about it. And so I wrote a paper about it. So yeah, no, there are no trade demarcations in my view of the SCA. We all do art, and we all do service, and one way or another, if we try a bit, we can all be part of the armed might of our kingdom.
Whether that be actual fighting or supporting through marshalling or whatever, right?
Indeed. Like as the Frenchman said, amateurs discuss tactics, professionals discuss logistics. And logistic requirements for an army are significant.
Very cool. So you said that you had some photos of your work. Did you want to share those?
I would be happy to, and I'll share some, but what you've got to do is you've got to be ready to, first of all, if I'm making mistakes in sharing, and I'm flipping through pictures and I haven't paused them or something like that, and everybody's getting ill, shout out and tell me. And you must be prepared to interrupt with questions, because I can talk for England and you don't need me to do that. All right, so let me share some stuff with you. Nope, that was wrong. See, I'm useless at this. I do this all day, every day with work. You'd think I'd get good at it.
And we should have practiced this ahead of time, and we didn't. So
we should have done lots of rehearsals.
Yes.
So this is my grandmother's kitchen table in 1985. And this is the first peerage scroll that ever I did for a lady called Ermid Godwin. And what I love about this is that I had been in the society for 5 years at this point. I was a 17-year-old kid, 18-year-old kid, and I was doing a laurel scroll in the East Kingdom. And I think it's really important that we understand that not everybody is a brilliant artist, but everybody can do their best work. And at the time, this was my best work. And, you know, I look at it now and I think, well, the letter forms weren't great. The spacing is terrible. But oh my goodness, did I spend so much time doing all of those little leaves. And I hope and pray, I haven't seen Alice Gardner as she's since been called. I haven't seen her in about 20 years, but I do hope that somewhere in her basement, she's keeping this safe.
It's amazing.
It's pretty, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
And there's another piece that I'll share. And this is not my first Hebrew scroll, but my second. And this was done for a fellow in what later became North Shield called Solomon ben Jacob. And this was his grant of arms scroll.
Wow.
And what I took care to do when I did this, working from, I think it was a 15th century original, was make sure that I and all my friends are in the bottom of this, dancing and drinking, and in one case, passing out drunk. and again, Solomon has sadly passed on, but I do hope that his children have preserved this, because it's a bit of mid-realm history, a bit of North Shield history, I suppose, and the esteem with which his kingdom held him, the esteem in which his kingdom held him, and the amount of work that I did, silly me, as a teenager, just to honor this fellow, I thought was significant. So I guess what's most important is for everyone to recognize that everybody starts somewhere. And I'm pretty good with a pen. And I did not start out as pretty good with a pen. I started out as just good enough with a pen. And that is where everybody starts, isn't it?
Yes.
There are a few things I want to take care and show you. I did a book, and this was a vigil book for a friend of mine who was being elevated to the Laurel. And this is how the book started. So it started off as 2 quarter-sawn bits of oak. And as the book developed, it went from effectively a single piece of wood cut up into some chunks. And using some really simple tools, I shaped it according to medieval exemplars. And we have, as you might imagine, a lot of books that give us a very clear picture of how books were made in the 14th century, and that's what I was seizing on here. And I didn't do the binding of the paper myself, because I don't have the equipment. I don't know how, and really I don't want to know how. And instead, this is it's made in India, and it's beautiful cotton paper with an excellent size to it, so it takes ink really well. And I used that, and I taught myself some of the patterns that we have for attaching a, as you might imagine, stiff wooden cover to flexible paper using leather. But also at the same time, I knew that I wanted to use 14th century hardware. And there are people who make 14th and 15th century hardware for restoring old Bibles. And they charge lots of money because they make beautiful pieces. And so what I did was I started carving fittings to make hinges and latches for the book. And I started carving them out of wax. And I designed them to, as closely as possible, resemble the sort of thing we see on 14th century books in particular. And why 14th century? Well, I do 14th century most of the time when I'm not fencing with a rapier. And I use 14th century, 1375 as my day of reference for a lot of the things I do. And here, just using a chisel and carving the channels that we see on 14th century books, we're able to create the kind of structure that will enable those flexible pages to be attached to this inflexible book. And all of that carving there is designed so that the book itself doesn't break its own bindings, so that hard oak doesn't become a factor in shredding the leather or shredding the paper. This has got to be built. You know, books in the Middle Ages, as I'm sure you know, are precious things.
Yeah.
And they have got to be made to last because even if they were rarely opened, their value was represented such a huge proportion of someone's wealth. So here you've got the simple tools that I use to do this. We've got chisels, we've got gouges, and we've got that nice light mallet. And the binding itself is made in part from white tawed leather. Now, I absolutely do not tan or taw my own leather, but this is white tawed leather made by a company in France. And it is very different from the kind of leather we're used to seeing, whether it's the modern chrome tan or even the sort of vegetable tan leather that many people in the SCA are used to. And we make the binding parts of it, parts of the binding out of white tawed leather in particular.
Wow.
And white tawed leather doesn't dry out easily. And we still have ancient bindings with white tawed leather because it remains so flexible for so long. And we're used to seeing, ornamental bits of book bindings, like you see that blue and yellow binding at the top there. Well, nowadays you buy that by the meter or by the yard from a bookbinding supplier. But in the Middle Ages, each of those was a stitch that went through the top of the book. And each of those helped stitch the book together. And in this case, this is linen cord that is attaching cotton paper to white tawed leather bindings.
Wow.
And I like to think that this is the sort of thing that I, Lyonet de Covenham, have got, if not on my own shelf in 1370 as an English noblewoman, that it is something which my chaplain might have, or my friend the bishop might have on a shelf in 1375. And that enables me to center my my SCA participation on something that is medieval. And as the book comes together, it really is for me a contact with people in the Middle Ages who had who would have had things like this, but not just because they would have seen things like this. Aspects of the bookbinding we're looking at now would never have been seen by human eyes after the bookbinder finished binding. So for instance, we can see this peg. The white tawed leather is attached to the oak with pegs. And the pegs in this case are made of the same wood that correction, these are not made of the same wood. These are made from some chestnut trees from near where I live in Surrey. And they're acting as connectors, which will last for a very long time, but also connectors which, if necessary, can be disconnected to rebind the book at some point without being destructive. So I'm talking a lot here, and I don't want to monopolize this too much as I shoot through all of this complexity.
I think this is wonderful. I think that going through these processes, you talk about this would be something that you owned as a noble woman, and going through the processes, I find of making things is so good at making you feel more immersed in the culture and understanding some of the intricacies of the culture.
Yeah, and of course, as I said earlier in response to your previous question, for me, immersion is such an important part of what I'm doing. And even though I was doing this, in the basement in my house with my daughters sitting beside me watching television, it is still an immersive experience. And it's one of the reasons, I don't hold myself up as a paragon of virtue because I use hand tools rather than using power tools. But the process of doing this with hand tools is also in its way an immersive experience.
Absolutely.
here we've got some calf leather, and this is vegetable tanned calf leather from the same tannery in France that produced the white tawed leather. And it is stretched over the oak. So all of that beautiful quarter sawn oak will never be seen again, or at least not unless Victoria chooses to rebind it. And in strapping it all up together, in this case with hemp cords, you can see that the book is starting to assume some of the shape that you see on medieval books. And when you go to Duke Humphreys Library in Oxford, where I spent an unconscionable amount of time when I was a postgrad in Oxford, in Duke Humphreys, you will see books with these characteristics on the shelves. And in fact, if you see Harry Potter films with Duke Humphreys Library in there, you see a lot of the characteristics that you see in the book itself. And then when I got round to making the fittings for the book, which are all designed either to keep it shut or to keep it from being battered by other books on the shelf. These are all carved. You saw the clasps earlier. They're all carved in wax. And then in this case, you can see that little bits of wax for attaching them to the book have been added on. And it's all been cleaned up nicely. And you might notice that the motif there is a pelican in its piety, vulning its breast. So the latches for the book are laurels, and the buffers are pelicans. So when I send these off to the casters and they come back pretty rough, but you can see the detail in them already. And then with lots and lots of hand polishing, you can get pieces that enable the book to be clasped in, I suppose we might say, in a period way, and also to be protected in a period way, so that Victoria can stick this on her bookshelf at home without worrying about having to protect it, because this is so much more durable than the other books she's got on her shelf, because modern mass-produced books are comparatively inexpensive, whereas medieval books, because they were so precious, had to be looked after very differently.
Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah. So I don't want to make one project the story of this, but one project, if taken as a single multimedia project based on medieval exemplars, becomes a whole nest of projects. I've got a friend who says that what the SCA is not a hobby, it is a context for hobbies. And I think that there is something to be said for that, right? Bookbinding is absolutely not my hobby. I'm not a bookbinding Laurel. I'm interested in bookbinding, but it is not the sum total of what I do. It is instead an invitation to do a lot of different work that is going to create something that is as medieval as we can imagine. So that's my book project for Victoria.
That's amazing. It's wonderful. And did you cover this too, or is this something that you can see?
Well, there is no cover that goes over this. So it is a there were slip covers for books in the Middle Ages, and
Wow.
And I guess I could have done that as well. Now I'm thinking that maybe the next book is going to have a slip cover.
It's just beautiful.
Thank you. Now, it would not surprise you if I say that I've got about a gazillion possible things that I can show, and I don't want to throw your pace off. So
honestly, I don't really have a pace with these interviews. It's all about you talking about your journey and showing what your version of the SCA is. And that was fascinating, and I would very enthusiastically follow you down another rabbit hole if you have another one to share.
Well, as it happens, I do. One of the things that I thought I might show is was a project with lots of micrography and lots of Hebrew micrography. But in catching up on your other interviews, I discovered that you've already had had someone's micrography rabbit hole as part of your interview series. So I'm absolutely not going to bore everybody by going into micrography, and instead, I'll go in a different direction if that's all right.
Yes, please.
And I'll start with another piece of wood. And again, I'm not a woodworker as such, but I started a project with a piece of linden wood because in the Middle Ages, this is the sort of thing people did with linden wood. And I was confronted with the idea of making an award scroll for someone who had no shortage of awards and for whom persona was very important. And that was Mrs. Rogned Stangrimovna, originally from Antir, now thankfully with us in Insula Draconis in Drachenwald. And Rogned is a Novgorod woman, and I decided I was going to do something that harked from Novgorod. And one of the things that I love in Novgorod is the iconography of the Eastern Church.
Yeah, they're so beautiful.
Indeed, and this is a three-handed Virgin from Novgorod, and this icon is part of a genre which, as you see, the Virgin here has got three hands, and that's because at some point a devoted follower of the Blessed Virgin Mary built or made an icon with a silver hand, and the silver hand came loose and slid down the frame a little bit, and that made it look as though the Virgin had three hands. And in Eastern Christian theology, icons are not just a picture of what you think the Blessed Virgin Mary might look like. They are, by divine inspiration, what the Blessed Virgin Mary looked like. So subsequent artists in Novgorod decided the Blessed Virgin Mary had three hands. And so there is an entire genre of icons from Novgorod which have three hands. So I started off with a piece of linden wood, and I set out to turn it into an icon that could serve as an appropriate scroll for Mrs. Rogned. And the first thing I did was I covered it in linen fabric, and then covered the linen fabric in rabbit skin glue, and then in rough gesso. And I then put a finer gesso over the rough gesso. And the way you make these icons is you keep adding layers of fine gesso, and you brush them on in opposite directions, in orthogonal directions. So you get a thicker and thicker surface of smoother and smoother gesso. And you can see here I used some very fine veil linen to do that. And at the end of it, there is a very thick, very well adhered gesso surface. And that surface is able to support a covering, an artwork on top of it that is that reveals absolutely nothing of the linen or of the wood that lies underneath. Because
I have a quick question. I'm going to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
All right.
Rabbit skin glue, is that something you can purchase from somewhere, or is that something that you had to produce yourself?
Oh, good God, no. I am absolutely not the sort of person who skins rabbits. I'm an English noblewoman. I'm happy to spend my time making art. I'm absolutely not happy to skin rabbits. There is a shop in London called Cornelison's, and Cornelison's sells all the art supplies you have ever heard of and have ever not heard of. And when you go in there, on their beautiful old shelves, they have jars of pigments and little packets of rabbit skin glue and hide glue and Damar varnish. and all that stuff. And if you go to Cornelison's, experiment with the spelling and do some searching, go to Cornelison's on the web. They'll post stuff to you anywhere in the world, and they're absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Not at all. That's where my rabbit skin glue comes from, and they'll sell you isinglass. You know, all of those pigments that you've heard of that everyone says we don't use because they're too toxic, like minium and red lead, and there's all of that stuff. It's great. I'm a real fan of using red lead. While I'm using it, I'm always convinced I'm about to die, but if I take precautions, I think I'm all right. And so you can see here that we end up with a slab of wood that shows no signs of being a slab of wood. And there's also not really any sign of the linen on it either. And if you take, as I did, a cartoon here and draw it onto, draw upon it, you can make the outlines appear in the gesso. And the way these icons are made, they're made as though you're looking through a window at the religious figures inside. And so we create a window out of more layers of gesso around the frame. And then you can see that the image itself is carved into the gesso. And that's something of special religious significance in Eastern Christianity. The way that it is incised is very significant. And the pigments that we're using here are carmine, and here's again Cornelison's branding all over this stuff, is carmine and viridian and verdigris. And the big jar there is Venice red, which is safe as houses. It's iron oxide, it's rust. And
Wow.
And none of these pigments is cheap, but you use so little of each one that you can get a lot of mileage out of the pigments, even though they're expensive. And here we've got some size, which is going to give us a base for sticking the gold leaf on. And then here we've got it covered in gold leaf. I'm not very good at gold leaf, but the joy of making icons with gold leaf is that you can put all sorts of incisions into the gesso, and that makes ornamentation that comes out when the gold is on, and that covers up a lot of the imperfections in the gold leaf. So, 14th century French illumination is covered with these flat sheets of leaf, and I am very, very frustrated when I try to do that. But Novgorod icons, no trouble at all getting lots of that on there. And you can see that I've taken it with gold leaf on it, and I've put another layer of size on it and put another layer of leaf on it, so that there's actually a pretty thick coating of gold on this icon.
Wow.
And again, that sort of bling, that sort of bling is just the sort of thing that medieval worshippers really appreciated. And again, when we put ourselves in the position of medieval people looking at objects of veneration, objects of value, and people went on pilgrimages to see these, we can put ourselves in their place, not just the people who made these icons, but the people who appreciated them.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is so cool.
And as we develop the figures, in this case the Virgin Mary and the Infant Christ, we see that we use layers of paint in different colors that are designed to create the impression of what people in the Middle Ages thought of as real flesh. And the problem with that is that when you use some of these pigments, you get really weird colors of people's skin. And the Black Madonna of Czestochowa is a famous icon known for its odd layers of color and tarnished black silver. But all of these layers have ritual significance for medieval icon painters, and of course for modern followers of that same religion. And you can see here we've got this beautiful delicate dark green that comes with verdigris. And verdigris is used in icons, but also in other types of medieval art and craft because it's an antifungal. So it's used in book bindings, for instance, because it keeps the books from getting rotten. And in this case, we've got the medieval flesh tone. So we've got minium, red lead, mixed with flake white lead. We have a really toxic pigment there, and the viridian is not good for you either. So we're able to take very carefully and in very small amounts these medieval pigments and combine them in ways that are really surprising. Because when we see the finished product, we don't see that pink. What we see is an odd greenish brown color, which appears to have been viewed as the appropriate color at the time for divine beings, if not ordinary human beings. And of course, you can see that we have the extra hand there. So the infant Christ has got two hands, one little hand there in benediction, one little hand there resting on his mother. And then here we have the Virgin's 1 hand, 2 hand, and 3 hand. Because it's a Novgorod icon.
And then is that Christ's little foot sticking out down there?
Correct. That is Christ's little foot sticking out there because it just wouldn't be the baby Jesus if there weren't a foot sticking out, I suppose. So it's not identical to the exemplar, and I wasn't seeking to copy the 3-handed Virgin. What I was seeking to do was try to use the same methods to enable myself to be that medieval craftswoman, and also so that as Rogned gets this as her award scroll, it will enable her to have that contact with Novgorod that she seeks in her participation in the society.
That's wonderful. And what was that award scroll for? What award was that?
Well, Mrs. Rogned has her laurel, and this was the Order of the Panache. And the Panache is the Drachenwald Arts Award. Now we would say it's the AOA level Arts Award, but that's a recent change in Drachenwald. We didn't used to have grant level awards. And when Drachenwald was founded, the early members, Charles Stewart O'Connor, Regina Romsey in particular, were people who didn't want another award on a cord. And so when they created Drachenwald Awards, they created dress accessories. And the Order of the Panache is a hat pin. And the comparable order for service is a ring, a finger ring. And the comparable order for armored combat is a wrist guard.
Wow.
So that is the Order of the Panache. And panache is such a great word for an artist, isn't it?
It is. It's wonderful. So do you know Regina Romsey?
We've been in contact. At my first, my second Pentac War, I saw her, and she was a Viscountess. And I'd never seen a Viscountess before. And she was from far off Drachenwald. and there was me from Toronto going down to Penzig and seeing this woman who lived in Germany and who was very intimidating and very impressive. And we've been in contact since. But I tell you, at the time, she was about the most intimidating figure I could imagine.
She lives here in Portland, right across the river from me. So I just, that was an interesting little connection. So, and yes, she's wonderful.
She is. And if you ask her for stories of old time Drachenwald, she will tell you excellent stories of old time Drachenwald.
It makes me realize that I should really look in my backyard and perhaps interview her, because I have not. And that would be a really great interview.
I agree.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning her. So do you want to take a look at some of your fighting photos that I have that you sent me?
Sure.
So it's my turn to try to share screen successfully. go.
There we go. So 14th century kit, 14th century hat, except I should probably have the plumes centered. That is the Order of the Panache, those feathers you see on my hat.
Yes.
How's that for a Kingdom Hearts Award badge?
That's lovely. So I have a question. Is the edging on your hat, is that a finger loop braiding?
Yes, it is.
Wonderful.
And if I were doing it again, I would try to work it onto the hat, but I just made the finger loop braiding and then stitched it on.
Stitched it on.
And it's in a lovely silk yarn. And one of the things that I try to do with respect to my fighting kit is try to have excuse me, I have 14th century kit for using 14th century weapons, and so this is the Charles de Bois pourpoint was my basis for this. And it got lots of room in the chest, which is very helpful. And it's made with wool as the shell, because wool is wonderfully abrasion resistant. And when I went to Pensacola in 2019, for the first time in 25 years, I made new fencing kit because I was damned if I was going to wear a padded wool jack in 50 degrees centigrade in Western Pennsylvania.
With that humidity. Whew.
With that humidity.
It was too much.
Oh, that's a good intimidating shot. Oh, and there's me with my poor dead Richard. You know, one of the things that my persona has is a dead husband. And my dead husband has been dead as long as necessary, because he's never existed, of course. And we have this beautiful site for events in a place called Buckton Towers near St. Neots. It was a former palace of the Bishop of Lincoln. And they've got this hanging up in the corridor. And so that is now my poor dead Richard, who died in the Great Mortality. Of course, plague jokes used to be funny, and now they're not so funny anymore, are they?
They are not as funny, no. Because there's too much pain attached now.
Well, there's me fencing with the late Tyvar Moondragon from Onsteora. And that was a name to conjure with when I first started fencing. The idea that he was going to fetch up at Raglan Castle and fight in if I recall correctly, was my prefect prize play, playing for the top rank in the Drachenwald Academy of Defense. And suddenly there is this SCA fencing legend, and I was very privileged to have that contact with the early days of SCA fencing. And of course, it was a great honor to have that contact come between my blade and his chest.
Wonderful.
It is a lovely sight. And here once again, Raglan Castle, I mean, they let us take the place over every summer. And I can't wait until the plague is done and we can get back there. And as you can see, even though SCA fencing is sometimes thought of as sort of a late period pursuit, 16th century stuff, 16th century manuals and 16th century kit, or even, God help us, 17th century kit. There's me in the blue with Duke Finvar's colors and Duke Finvar's mullets on my fencing kit, doing my best to fight Lichtenauer style. And Lichtenauer was a 14th century fencing master, and he had a lot to say about longsword. And there's me trying to be a Lichtenauer fencer. And also, you know, people talk about fencing. People used to talk about fencing as light fighting.
Yes.
And as you can see, my fencing kit is not light.
No. At all.
At all. Because it's all wool as well. I mean there's linen in there as well, but it's all wool and steel. My goodness, I'm so vigorous. And this is Double Wars. Double Wars is in Sweden, and if you've ever read Pippi Longstocking stories, this is in Pippi Longstocking country. and you fly to Copenhagen, and then you take the train into Sweden, and you go across southern Sweden, and you come to this beautiful, quiet site. And one of the key things about it is that built into a hill is a sauna. And for Double Wars, we have this little hobbit hole of a sauna, and outside of it, we have two big wooden hot tubs, each one at a different temperature. So when I and my opponent here were done fighting, we were able to drop our kit, go into the sauna, bake all of the aches and pains of fighting out of our bones, and then wash it all off in the shower, and then spend some time in the hot tub. So if anybody across the known world is interested in good summer events, I've got to say that Raglan Castle in August for Raglan Fair, and in May at Double Wars in Sweden, two excellent events. And of course here we're fighting at the barrier, and we've got me, a 14th century fighter, and we've got a 16th century fighter on the right, and the two of us are going at it, each in our own time period across the barrier.
Tell me about those boots you're wearing. Did you make those?
I did make those. And fascinatingly, I made those back when I used to do 16th century years and years ago. And I made them with boxy-toed 16th century shoe bits at the bottom. And when I started to do 14th century, I ripped the bottoms off and got myself some nice leather and made some turn shoes, and then stitched them onto those lovely long high boot tops to give myself some conjectural 14th century riding boots. We have so little source material on 14th century boots, and it really looks as though people wore them for riding, and that's about it. And it could be that nobles didn't wear them at all, but in order to make the point that I'm wearing them for riding, I have got my black iron spurs on there as well. And that's why I'm glad that in Drachenwald cut and thrust rules, at least until recently, if you get hit on the leg, it's a kill. So I would not have to hunker down and fight from my knees with those spurs going up my ass.
Yeah, no, that would, nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that.
And are the boot tops held on by straps to a belt?
Those are, you're very sharp-eyed. So those have got straps that go to a belt, which again is absolutely conjectural for the 14th century. But as you can also see, I've got my regular stocking garters buckled on the outside instead of around the inside, instead of around my stockings. And that is really what's holding them up. If it were just those straps, it wouldn't hold up very well. It would be uncomfortable.
No, and if you're active, and obviously you're being very active in these, you would have to have something holding up those tops, otherwise they would scrunch down.
Correct.
So
correct.
That's one of the things that fascinates me about costuming is the functionality and how certain things just have to be constructed certain ways because they don't work otherwise.
Yeah, and as Duke Caradoc has said in the past, if you want to know how to do something right, see how they did it in the Middle Ages, and do it the way they did it, and that works. You can see in this picture, I have not strapped the boots onto my onto the belt that I've got my hose on, and therefore they're much scrunchier than they were in the other one. Yeah. And one of the things that we see in this picture is that at the time I was a provost of the Drachenwald Academy of Defense, and so I had that red and black spaghetti on my shoulder, and I now, as a prefect, have a golden black bit of spaghetti. And one of the lovely things we have in Drachenwald is the Academy of Defense, which is a fencing club within the SCA. And when you decide that you want to move up in the club and become a higher ranking fencer, there is no secrecy. There is no waiting for someone to recognize you. There is no private letters of recommendation to the crown the way there is for awards. You decide that you want to do it, you get someone to sponsor you, and you go and do it. And you do the thing and you get the string. So when I wanted to be a provost, I got my level of fitness to where I could go out on the field and fight for half an hour against all comers, and where I had all of the authorizations necessary for doing that. And when I wanted to be a prefect, I had to be authorized in pretty much everything. And I had to go out there and fight 45 prescribed fights against people already of that rank. And then I had to take on all comers for an hour. And you stand out in the field and you fence for an hour. And you might take a sip of water here and there, but really it's a test of fitness, it's a test of stamina, it's a test of the ability to remain in control of your weapons while you're exhausted. And really what I think is splendid about it is that it is an approach to recognition that is far less structured and far more transparent than we're used to seeing. And I like that as well.
I like that too. Is it sort of similar to maybe a guild for, yeah?
Yeah, it is. And, you know, just as guilds were based on medieval confraternities, whether religious or trade guilds, our Academy of Defense is based on the London Masters of Defense, who had their fencing schools, who had their ways of playing prizes to achieve recognition, and we have that as well. So we've got our period exemplar in the 16th century, and our society attempt to recreate it.
That's really cool.
I think so.
Yeah. Wow. And how did that come about? Was there a certain person that kind of was the driving force behind making that happen?
From the point of view of developing our academy as such, I'm sure there was, and I'm sure I don't know who it is.
Okay.
Who it was. But it's important that we remember that before the society started to have fencing awards, fencing recognition was hard to come by.
Right.
And there were kingdoms, and Drachenwald was one of them, that refused to sign the White Scarf Treaty, where some elements of the society just did not want to see that kind of recognition extended to people who were fighting with what they viewed as a marginal approach to fighting. And they liked the idea that armored combat with rattan batons needed to be at the center of the society, and were very uncomfortable at the time with things like fencing. And many kingdoms, East Kingdom, for instance, had, and the Middle Kingdom had fencing guilds is a good word, had fencing guilds which had ranks for recognition, because there were no kingdom awards in many kingdoms for fencing. Some kingdoms still have little or no recognition for fencing.
Wow. See, I coming up in Ontier, some of the first Laurels that I met were, I want to say fencing Laurels, but that's incorrect. They're medieval combat Laurels. And we had white scarves, and it was very much, it felt always to me, I have never been a big part of that community, but it always felt like it was a very rich and appreciated community in the kingdom. And it's sad that it's not that way everywhere. And to hear that it's still not legitimized in some kingdoms is kind of shocking. So,
well, we as a society change very slowly in some ways. And Drachenwald has developed a very mature culture of fencing, and we have award recognition for all combat arts together. So fencing, armored combat, archery, and potentially equestrian and thrown weapons and siege engineering all share the same awards, which I think is splendid. And at the same time, I think it is also splendid that we have something which was originally developed because there wasn't recognition for fencers, and what it's turned into is a really great, fun club within the club. And here, in this case, this is me standing at an event at Treetower Court, which is a beautiful little castle and manor house in Wales, where we had a fencing colloquium. And not only did we have the joy of fencing in this lovely garden, but the kitchen at Tower Court, the medieval kitchen, is largely intact. And we have got people who are capable of deploying their cooking equipment into this kitchen, and we sweep aside all the stuff that they have to show to the tourists and put that into one room. And our cooks are able to cook in a 15th century kitchen using their 15th century kit, producing 15th century meals, which we eat in a 15th century manor house.
What an awesome, awesome experience.
So when travel starts again, I think that everyone in the known world has to keep an eye on the Drachenwald events calendar and keep an eye out for fun stuff like this, so that you can, when you can start traveling again, you can travel to Drachenwald.
You're going to be overrun.
We're good with that. We're very hospitable. Gosh, I sent you far too many pictures. And this is me heralding a crown tournament. So what's fun about this dress is that everybody knows what a Gothic fitted dress looks like. I'm wearing one right now, a Gothic fitted gown. And everybody knows what a houppelande looks like, where you have something that's much looser and shows off a different kind of fabric in a different way. And we also have a little bit of evidence that there is a transitional garment between a gown like this one and a houppelande. And in real life, of course, nobody said, "Oh my goodness, it's the year 1400. Put away your Gothic fitted gown and have your seamstress run you up a houppelande." There were transitional forms. And I made this gown here that you see, partly because I need to wear wool, because as you've observed, we have events outdoors. And also because I can't always be struggling into a fitted gown to go out and herald a tournament. So I found some really lovely funerary effigies, largely with older women in them, which works for me as I go into my second half century, where they were wearing something that was clearly looser, something that's loose across the body, which had very loose sleeves, which folded back. And I decided to make one. And I decided to do it while proving one of my theories about the way sleeves were made, which is that it wasn't just fighting kit that had the dinner plate sleeve, you know, the grande assiette sleeve that we see on the Charles de Bois pourpoint that I fight in. But I decided that it is entirely possible that women's gowns were also made with a variation of that sleeve. And so that is my gown that tests that suggestion. And like the gown I'm wearing, it just skims the point of the shoulder, because there's a particular source I'm fond of, the Romance of Alexander, which shows that neckline. So it skims the shoulder, but it also has that trumpet-shaped sleeve and that interesting sort of racer back pattern that we see in those dinner plate sleeves.
And is it easier to move around and be active in that dress?
Oh my goodness, yes, absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, you can see that it's very loose around the body, loose in the belly, and the sleeves are loose. So whereas this gown I'm wearing has got an army of sleeves to do up all the time, over a dress that has an army of buttons to do up. That just, you put it on like a coat, and you just throw it on, and it keeps you warm, keeps you dry. I've worn it in the snows of Finland, and it is an all-around useful garment.
Brilliant, I love it.
And I'm clearly having a good time in that picture.
Yes, you are.
My goodness, I really sent you highlights. So when we in Drachenwald decided that we were going to have what are called the grant level awards, we considered inserting new awards and promoting our Kingdom Awards to grant level. We had no history of having a separate set of awards. We just had Kingdom Awards. But we created new awards at grant level. And they're all part of something called the Order of the Ring of Drachenwald, also called the Black Ring. And within the ring, we have 3 companies, and one is for arts, and one is for service, and one is for all of combat. And what you see there are the 3 principles of the combatant order, which is the company of the wing, and that's me in the middle, looking frighteningly martial with my sword over my shoulder, and my friend's Viscount Lyonet on the right of the screen to my left, and behind him is King Sheridan, who many people from Lochak or Callantir will also recognize because he reigned there as well. And then beside him, to my right, to the left in the picture, is Yahanara, who's also someone from Callantir, who people might recognize. And then we have, crikey, I'm remembering only her modern name and not her medieval name, which is one of these horrible things that happens with the plague. We see each other in social media with our modern names as Catelyn the Marshal in yellow, and I am a former armored fighter and now a fencer. Catelyn is a superb fencer and now a dame of defense, and Lyonet is an armored fighter who also fences, but who is a superb archer. So we were the 3 principles of the New Order, and as you can see, the 3 principles were not stereotypical SCA stick jocks. We've got the lithe archer and armored fighter. We've got the 2 big women fencers there. Catelyn's taller than I am, and I'm not small. And we represented, I think, a really different view of what a fighter in the SCA means.
I like that very much. I think that representation is very important.
Well, it is. And I mean, I'm very proud that when inspirational equality started, I was one of the first people to be contested for in a same-sex couple here in Insular Draconis and in Drachenwald. And there were people who were 1 or 2 people who came before us, but same-sex couples are so usual now in the Isles and in Drachenwald. And not just people who are LGBTQ, but friends fighting for friends, and that dynamic has utterly changed from the days when that sort of thing was forbidden.
Yay!
Indeed.
Oh, sorry.
We don't have to. I don't want you to feel bound to go through every picture we've got.
There's only 11, so it's fine.
Oh my goodness. Wow, what I like about this one is I really look like I'm about to do somebody in, which of course I was. And also that in my faceplate there, I'll talk about the faceplate.
Okay.
You can see the castle reflected in it. That's in the fountain court at Raglan Castle. SCA fencing rules, perfectly reasonably, require you to have a faceplate that you can't stick a sword into. And in the Middle Ages, they didn't have that sort of faceplate much. And so what I did was I had an excellent craftsman in Poland create a faceplate that had tiny little breaths in it. And that makes it quite a chunky thing to wear, but legal for SCA fencing. I use it for cut and thrust.
And how is your vision in that? How is the
Not that good. Not that good. So it's a trade-off. When you wear a fencing mask, you've got great vision, you've got great breathing, but you're wearing this modern-looking thing on your head.
Yeah.
And in the early 90s, when my friends and I started to fence using historical manuals, we decided we didn't want to wear fencing masks because if we wore them, we wouldn't fence like Renaissance fencers. So we put big champagne corks on the tips of the swords, and we put a 2-penny coin so that the sword wouldn't drive through, and wrapped them all up in fabric. So you had this great big thing on the end of it that would not go into your eye socket. And we fenced with those, and the fencing is different when you're not wearing a mask. So the joy for me of being able to fence in something that looks a bit more historical, I don't mind what other people wear, is that it makes me feel a bit more historical. And I've asked a local craftsman to make me a 16th century helmet now for rapier fighting.
Wonderful.
That's my 16th century kit that I made for Penzig last year. Wasn't quite done in time for Penzig, but I hadn't had time to paint it. But there's me trying to look 1560s. And my rapier was made by a craftsman here in England. And he made it based on an original from 1560. And so I decided that all of my other kit has got to be 1560 as well. So, and it's all wool and linen and leather. So it's all very, very natural materials. I'll be very biodegradable.
And that's it. See,
That's
not
quite
many.
the gallery.
It was good. Well, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to talk about?
Gosh. I'm really glad that we were able to talk about art. And I'm really glad that we didn't talk much about peerage, because I often find myself talking about peerage, qua peerage in the society, because it's something I'm very interested in, the philosophy of that. And so it's really good to, for me anyway, to basically just give you a bit of a lecture on methods and developing projects. And so I really enjoyed that experience. I've also managed to put a few plugs in for people to come and visit Drachenwald once people can travel again. And very soon we're going to have our 30th anniversary. And that's going to be in the Netherlands. And you can do a lot worse than come to a beautiful event in a beautiful country like the Netherlands to enjoy the society in a different environment. But I guess if I wanted to cover off on one more thing, it's that we as a club have got our own culture, and we've got a culture of inclusion. We've got a culture of allowing people to participate with mobility aids, with eyeglasses, with ankle supports, and we don't see those. We choose not to see them because that makes it better for people to participate. And we're able to be both inclusive in a very broad way, and also to keep our eyes on the history, or in your case, clearly the prehistory. And that's something really special as well. So I think what's important for us to do going forward, for all of us, is to keep one eye on keeping our culture healthy and positive and encouraging and inclusive. And on the other hand, also having aspiration, not to lose sight of the history, of recreation, of the highest standards of scholarship in the way we approach combat as well as other arts. And I think that we can always optimize, we can always make things better, and we should never be satisfied with things the way they are. People sometimes say to me, why do you want to change that? If it's not broke, don't fix it. And there's nothing that doesn't deserve a little bit of attention, a little bit of improvement. And I think we always need to do that as well.
I think it's important to remain a dynamic society, or we'll fade. We are an aging population. I am of the same age as you are, and I still consider myself a youngster, which I'm really not anymore.
We are.
So it's important that we're open to those changes, and that we're open to the up and coming generations in our society being as dynamic as we have been. So
I agree.
Yeah,
and I think it's great that you're able to communicate so well across the society. I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation at all shows that not only are you able to put a message out there, but you're also able to draw people in. I mean, you and I have never met. We know some people in common, but we've both been in the society for a while and have never knowingly met each other. And yet here you've drawn me into this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for being brave and taking a chance on me and telling me your story. I really, really appreciate it.
It's such a pleasure.
Yeah, this would not happen without people willing to take that leap with me. So I really appreciate it. And I hope that I do get to meet you in person someday, because I find what you do and how you think really fascinating and inspiring.
Thank you, and likewise, and I look forward to seeing more of your interviews and more of your discussions.
So thank you. We'll keep going.
And do look after your health.
Absolutely. We have basically treated this whole thing like a lockdown, and don't really go anywhere. So the interviews are part of my mental health.
Excellent. I approve.
Well, thank you again, and thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you soon. Have a great evening, for me, day. Bye.
Bye.